Content warning: this story contains themes of domestic violence, sexual content, and serious illness that some readers may find disturbing. Aduk stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the battered woman looking back at her. Bruises mottled her cheeks and arms, painful reminders of Ademola's drunken rage the night before. How had her fairy tale romance turned into such a nightmare? As tears welled in her eyes, Aduk heard a small voice behind her. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Aduk quickly wiped her face and forced a smile for her daughter. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Mommy just has a headache." But deep down, she wondered how much longer she could keep up this charade. 10 years earlier. Aduk nervously smoothed her freshly pressed uniform as she walked through the gates of the University of Ibadan for the first time. At 18 years old, she was finally starting her journey to become a doctor, a dream she'd held since childhood. As other freshmen bustled around her, Aduk felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was her chance for a new beginning, away from her strict parents and sheltered upbringing. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the guy barreling towards her until it was too late. They collided hard, sending Aduk stumbling backwards. "Whoa there. You okay?" A strong hand gripped her arm, steadying her. Aduk looked up into the most handsome face she'd ever seen. The guy flashed her a dazzling smile that made her heart skip a beat. "I'm so sorry," Aduk stammered. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "No worries," he replied with a wink. "I'm Ademola." "And you are?" "Hey Aduk," she managed to squeak out. "Well Aduk, welcome to Unibaden. I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other." With another heart-stopping grin, Ademola sauntered off, leaving Aduk staring after him in a daze. From that moment on, Ademola was all Aduk could think about. She soon learned he was a second-year medical student with a reputation as both a genius and a player. Everywhere she went, she heard whispers about his latest exploits, how he'd aced another impossible exam or broken another girl's heart. Aduk tried to focus on her studies, but found herself constantly distracted by glimpses of Ademola around campus. He always seemed to be surrounded by a flock of beautiful girls, laughing and flirting. Aduk longed to be part of that world, but she felt plain and awkward in comparison. Still, she couldn't help but admire Ademola's brilliance. In class discussions, he'd effortlessly rattle off complex medical facts that left even the professors impressed. During practical exams, his steady hands and quick thinking put the rest of the students to shame. One day after a particularly grueling anatomy lab, Aduk worked up the courage to approach Ademola. Excuse me," she said timidly. "I was wondering if maybe we could study together sometime. You seem to really understand this material and I could use some help." Ademola gave her a dismissive once-over. "Sorry babe, I don't do study dates with freshmen. Maybe try the library." With that, he turned back to the leggy blonde hanging on his arm. Aduk felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as she hurried away. She berated herself for even trying. What made her think someone like Ademola would give her the time of day? But despite the rejection, Aduk couldn't get Ademola out of her mind. Night after night, she lay awake imagining what it would be like to be with him. During the day, she found herself watching him from afar, studying his habits and preferences. After months of observation, Aduk noticed a pattern. The girls Ademola paid attention to all had a certain look, tight clothes, lots of makeup, and curvaceous figures they weren't afraid to show off. It was the complete opposite of Aduk's modest dresses and minimal makeup. With a mix of determination and desperation, Aduk decided it was time for a change. She raided her savings and went on a shopping spree, buying form-fitting outfits that accentuated her naturally curvy body. She learned to apply makeup from YouTube tutorials, transforming her fresh-faced look into something more sultry. The next time Aduk saw Ademola on campus, she made sure he noticed her. Swallowing her nerves, She sashayed past him in a snug crop top and miniskirt. She felt his eyes follow her, taking in her newly revealed figure. "Aduk, is that you?" Ademola called out, jogging to catch up with her. "Damn girl, where have you been hiding all this time?" Aduk's heart raced as Ademola's gaze raked over her body appreciatively. "Oh, you know," she said with feigned nonchalance. "Just focusing on my studies." "Well, how about we focus on some extracurriculars together?" Ademola suggested with a sly grin. "I'd love to get to know the new you better." And just like that, Aduk was in. She started joining Ademola and his friends at parties and clubs, reveling in finally being part of the popular crowd. Ademola showered her with attention, always finding excuses to touch her or whisper flirty comments in her ear. But Aduk wanted more than just physical attraction. She craved a real connection with Ademola, to be his confidant and support system. So she suggested they start studying together, offering to help him prepare for exams. To her surprise and delight, Ademola agreed. They began meeting regularly in the library, poring over medical texts side by side. Aduk relished these quiet moments together, even if Ademola's wandering hands sometimes made it hard to concentrate. As the weeks passed, Aduk fell more deeply in love. She convinced herself that beneath Ademola's playboy exterior was a sensitive soul just waiting for the right woman to bring it out. She imagined a future where they'd graduate together, get married, and become a power couple in the medical field. But there was one area where Aduk still held back: physical intimacy. Despite Ademola's increasingly insistent advances, she clung to her virginity. It was the one piece of herself she wasn't ready to give up, even for the man she loved. Ademola grew frustrated with her refusals, but Aduk stood firm. "I'm saving myself for marriage," she told him. "If you really care about me, you'll respect that." What Aduk didn't realize was that her reluctance only made Ademola more determined to conquer her. To him, she had become a challenge, the elusive virgin he hadn't been able to claim. As their final year of university approached, the pressure intensified. Aduk was torn between her principles and her fear of losing Ademola. One night, overwhelmed by stress and desire, she made a fateful decision. With shaking hands, she dialed Ademola's number. "I'm ready," she whispered when he answered. "Come over." Ademola wasted no time rushing to her dorm room. What followed was a blur of sensations: passionate kisses, roaming hands, and ultimately searing pain as Aduk's virginity was taken. Afterwards, Aduk lay in Ademola's arms, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of her was relieved to have finally crossed this threshold. But another part felt hollow, realizing the experience hadn't been the magical union she'd imagined. Ademola, for his part, was surprised to discover Aduk had actually been a virgin. In all his years of conquest, he'd never deflowered a girl before. It stirred something unexpected in him, a possessive pride in being her first. But old habits die hard. Now that he'd gotten what he wanted from Aduk, Ademola's interest quickly waned. He stopped returning her calls and avoided her on campus. Aduk was devastated, unable to understand how he could discard her so easily after such an intimate experience. As graduation approached, Aduk fell into a deep depression. She'd sacrificed so much for Ademola, and now she felt used and abandoned. Her grades slipped and she barely had the energy to get out of bed most days. It was during this dark time that Ademola's best friend, Taiwo, reached out to her. He'd harbored feelings for Aduk for years, but always stepped aside out of loyalty to Ademola. Now, seeing her suffering, he couldn't stay silent any longer. Taiwo showered Aduk with the genuine care and affection she'd always craved from Ademola. He listened to her troubles, brought her food when she couldn't face the cafeteria, and gently encouraged her not to give up on her dreams. Slowly, Aduk began to heal. She threw herself back into her studies, determined to graduate with honors despite her setbacks. And though she was grateful for Taiwo's support, she couldn't bring herself to return his romantic feelings. Her heart, battered as it was, still belonged to Ademola. On graduation day, Aduk spotted Ademola in his cap and gown, surrounded by admirers as usual. Gathering every ounce of courage, she approached him one last time. "Congratulations," she said softly. "I just wanted to say goodbye and wish you well." Ademola looked at her with an unreadable expression. Then, to Aduk's shock, he dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring. "Aduk, I've been a fool," he declared. "These past weeks without you made me realize how much I need you in my life. You're the only girl who's ever seen past my facade. Will you marry me?" Aduk's mind reeled. This was everything she'd ever wanted, wasn't it? Before she could fully process what was happening, she found herself nodding yes as Ademola slipped the ring on her finger. The next few months passed in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Aduk threw herself into planning, pushing aside the nagging doubts in the back of her mind. She was so focused on achieving her happily ever after that she ignored the warning signs: Ademola's continued flirting with other women, his controlling behavior, the way he belittled her opinions. Their lavish wedding was the talk of the town. As Aduk walked down the aisle in her flowing white gown, she told herself this was the start of a perfect life with Ademola. She pointedly avoided Taiwo's concerned gaze from the best man's position. At first, married life seemed idyllic. Aduk and Ademola both landed prestigious medical residencies. They bought a beautiful home and spent weekends hosting glamorous parties for their colleagues. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect power couple. But behind closed doors, cracks began to show. Ademola grew increasingly possessive and verbally abusive. He accused Aduk of flirting with other doctors and berated her for any perceived shortcomings. His drinking, which had once seemed like harmless fun in college, spiraled out of control. The first time Ademola hit Aduk, they both told themselves it was a drunken mistake. He showered her with apologies and gifts, swearing it would never happen again. Aduk, still desperate to make her marriage work, chose to believe him. But the violence only escalated. Ademola's brilliant mind, once so attractive to Aduk, now seemed to work overtime, concocting cruel ways to manipulate and hurt her. He'd gaslight her into believing the abuse was her fault, then turn on the charm to remind her of the man she fell in love with. Through it all, Aduk clung to the hope that having a baby would change things. When she finally got pregnant, she was overjoyed. Surely this would be the turning point in their troubled marriage. Their daughter, Tommy, was born healthy and beautiful. For a brief time, it seemed Ademola had indeed changed. He doted on the baby and treated Aduk with a gentleness she hadn't seen in years. But as Tommy grew older, the facade crumbled. Ademola resented the attention Aduk gave their daughter. His drinking intensified and the abuse returned worse than ever. Now Aduk had to worry not only about her own safety, but protecting Tommy from witnessing the violence. One particularly brutal night, 5-year-old Tommy crept out of bed to find her father beating her mother in the living room. Terrified, the little girl ran to intervene. In his drunken rage, Ademola shoved Tommy aside. She hit her head on the coffee table with a sickening crack. The next few hours were a nightmare of flashing ambulance lights and frantic hospital corridors. But despite the doctor's best efforts, Tommy slipped away in the early hours of the morning. Aduk's anguished wails echoed through the hospital as she cradled her daughter's lifeless body. In the aftermath of Tommy's death, Aduk fell into a deep depression. She took a leave of absence from work and rarely left the house. Ademola, racked with guilt, temporarily stopped drinking and tried to be supportive. But old patterns soon resurfaced. One day, Aduk noticed a lump in her breast. She ignored it at first, too numb with grief to care about her own health. But as it grew larger and more painful, she finally went to the doctor. The diagnosis was devastating: stage 4 breast cancer that had already spread to her bones and liver. Aduk chose to keep her illness a secret from Ademola. She didn't want his false sympathy or to give him the satisfaction of knowing she was dying. Instead, she poured her remaining energy into writing in her diary, recording the truth of their toxic relationship and her regrets. As her condition worsened, Aduk found an unlikely source of comfort. Taiwo, who had remained a loyal friend despite everything, visited often to help care for her. His unwavering kindness made Aduk realize what true love really looked like. In her final days, she wished she had recognized it sooner. One evening, Ademola came home to find the house oddly quiet. He called out for Aduk but got no response. With growing unease, he made his way to the bedroom. There he found Aduk lying peacefully in bed, as if asleep. But her chest was still and her skin cold to the touch. Ademola's anguished cries filled the room as the reality of Aduk's death sank in. Through his tears, he noticed her diary on the nightstand. With trembling hands, he opened it and began to read. Page after page detailed the years of abuse, manipulation, and heartbreak he had inflicted on Aduk. He learned of her cancer diagnosis and how she had faced death alone rather than turn to him. Most painfully, he read of her enduring love for him despite everything, and her final realization that he had never truly loved her in return. Overwhelmed with grief and remorse, Ademola fell to his knees beside the bed. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed, clutching Aduk's lifeless hand. "I'm so sorry for everything." But it was too late for apologies. Aduk was gone, taking with her the unconditional love Ademola had always taken for granted. As police sirens wailed in the distance, summoned by concerned neighbors who heard his breakdown, Ademola realized he had lost the one person who had seen the good in him when no one else did. In the years that followed, Ademola tried to honor Aduk's memory by becoming the man she had always believed he could be. He got sober, threw himself into charity work, and strove to be a better doctor and person. But no matter how much good he did, he could never fully atone for the pain he had caused. And on quiet nights, when the weight of his guilt felt overwhelming, Ademola would reread Aduk's diary. Each word was a painful reminder of the love he had squandered and the bright future they might have had if only he had treasured her the way she deserved. In the end, Aduk and Ademola's tragic tale serves as a stark reminder of several important life lessons. 1. True love is built on mutual respect, trust, and kindness, not just physical attraction or the thrill of the chase. 2. People rarely change unless they genuinely want to, and it's dangerous to enter a relationship hoping to fix someone. 3. Domestic violence is never acceptable and should not be tolerated or excused. 4. It's crucial to value yourself and not compromise your principles or safety for the sake of a relationship. 5. Sometimes the love we are looking for is right in front of us, but we are too blinded by infatuation to see it. 6. Actions have consequences that can echo through generations, affecting not just ourselves but those we love most. 7. Forgiveness and redemption are possible, but they cannot undo the pain of the past. This story reminds us to choose our partners wisely, to treat others with compassion, and to recognize the value of genuine love and support when we find it. It also highlights the importance of speaking up against abuse and seeking help when in toxic relationships. Ultimately, we must learn to love ourselves enough to walk away from situations that diminish our worth and threaten our well-being.